Hi folks, this is not going to be a very long lecture, but I would like to begin talking about positioning and using CSS. So far we've been using tables to position things and frames too, but starting now and after the break, this is what we're going to be doing, is modifying our site and including CSS positioning as well. As we'll have some content in tables if it needs be, and as you know, we're going to have our map in frames, but for the overall general layout, we're going to be starting with incorporating the box model and some positioning using CSS. At the end of this lecture, I'm also going to give a little overview of what the web lab or lecture test, will be. I'd like to talk a little bit more about color at this time. A lot of people are incorporating their favorite colors, or they're trying to match colors together, and some people aren't great at developing colors. So I'd like to give a few pointers here, because choosing the right color is essential for the type of message that you're communicating, and whether and really is essential in whether people are going to stay at your site or not. So just looking at some of these, did you know white symbolizes mourning in China? So maybe you want to think twice about using this color as, I don't know, it's the standard background color. But this is, an interesting note. Purple is the color of death in many Catholic countries. Yellow may symbolize cowardliness in North America. So there's some cultural and perhaps some gender and age preferences to color. And using CSS, it's very easy to change our global color scheme. We've already got one, but you may want to rethink some of those colors after looking at these slides. I've got some color meanings here. There's a whole branch of psychology on the color and the effect of color on the human psyche. Red for passion, romance, fire, violence, aggression, stop, or warnings. Purple is, royalty and rarity. Dark blue. If you notice that most of the corporate type sites use blue, or light blue, openness, clean air, freshness. Green for nature and natural sites, and also for money and wealth. Envy is in there as well. Growth for green. Yellow, brightness and illumination, also signifies illness or cowardice. Also, yellow is a very stimulating color, much like red. They are very deeply stimulating. Black, power, sophistication, contemporary style. Death, morbidity, evil. And white, purity, innocence, cleanliness, truth, peace, coldness. So these are some colors. Now let's just take a look at some mistakes and triumphs that some sites have had when incorporating color. Now, generally we have two temperatures, you could say, of color, and if you think about your television screen, you have warm and cool colors. Blue and the blues, the greens, the grays, and purples, these are cool colors, and the warm colors, reds, yellows, and oranges. So now if you have a food site, you probably don't want to use blue because blue is an appetite suppressant. But what blue does do is invokes a sense of calm and tranquilness. Warm colors work well for food sites. As I was mentioning, I think before, that a lot of restaurants are actually painted yellow, or sorry, not yellow, or painted red, because that is an appetite stimulant. So intellectual content businesses, cool colors, those blues and greens and grays. Another strategy is to saturate or tone down the background, and it you want to accentuate the foreground colors. Now, where your content is, your main content, and a lot of times you see sites, and we've framed a couple of sites where you have the banner across the top and a menu or navigation scheme down the left-hand side. The center of the page is for your content. That should be the lightest tonal area on your page. Your brain expects that and expects dark text on a lighter background. Generally, because we're reading books or magazines, we always have a white background with black text. So you should try to do what the brain and what the eye expects. So your intense colors, you just want to use those to stimulate and to attract the eye. Should not use color, particularly red and green, to mark elements in such a way that a user needs to differentiate the colors to use the interface successfully. So now these two colors, red and green in particular, are very, those are the common colors that people can't see if they have color blindness. And the W3C guidelines state that these colors, red and green, on your page should not be used anywhere where navigation is located. So red, green to call attention to some features, but you should try to avoid those colors in areas of navigation. Some mistakes and some triumphs. So a complete triumph on the left, we have Mia Cuppa, and this is an upscale bakery, and what they've done is they have used basically three colors, a pale gray, a black, which is not 100% saturated black, but more like a 90% black saturated, and a beautiful yellow, and these and a white as well. So, and these colors, gray, yellow, and black, have made it's neutral. It's not interfering with you've got a yellow in there, so a warm color, but it's not interfering with any of those appetite suppressant colors. You're not introducing any of those, and it's so clean that it's got a very classy and elegant look to it. On the right, on the other hand, wow, I showed some of you in class the other day, and this is the Yale School of Art, believe it or not. I actually can't believe they did this. It's quite clearly a joke, but I don't think I've ever seen anything quite so ugly. I'd encourage you, I've got the sites here, and I'd encourage you to go and visit these sites. And one thing is, at the top they actually have a pale red text on a dark red background, and so you can't read the text at all unless you can, I suppose, if you zoom right into it, but the only real way to read the text is to actually highlight it. Some more mistakes and triumphs. So the big top tech jobs, IT tech jobs on the left hand side, and unfortunately I apologize to Big Top because I have actually condensed it so it'll fit on the page. Naturally it is not squished like that. It occupies a much more wider stand on the page, but you can see that they've used a very neutral and natural, beautiful palette. All of those colors you can find in nature, and I've given you the colors for the FDF3E7 is actually that gray color that you see around the boxes, what and when. Very, very easy on the eye, very soothing colors. On the right, this was a site that I came across, and there's so much more wrong than just color. There's so much going on here that it's just a very small clip. The horizontal and vertical scrolls are so long that you can just scroll forever. There's no end in sight. And I say there are no words because there really aren't any to describe this site. It's it's quite amazing. But they've mixed far too many colors in here. It just gets worse and worse as you go on. Before we move forward with class and ID selectors, just to summarize with colors, I think your best bet is to look at the context of your site, and there are a couple of food sites out there, and you should absolutely embrace natural and naturally occurring colors and avoid those primary red, green, blue, or sorry, red, yellow, blue primaries, and also the super green and the super orange. Just stay away from those colors. And for those that have more of a there's a couple of sites that are featuring cartography. I would suggest for those sites that are really looking at geographic areas, and I would suggest that you also stick with natural tones. A lot of maps and cartographic products you'll see stick to the same color scheme as historically has been used and is used in NTS maps, with topographic features in shades of brown, and vegetative features in shades of greens, water of course being blue, but really very natural colors. And if it's got a business or a corporate style to it, stick to those cool, crisp whites, blues, grays, greens, and different shades of those as well. And I think the other thing too to note about color is that it's probably a good idea to just stick with a few. If you go into Adobe Illustrator, they do have very extensive palettes that have 10, 15, 20 colors, but I think you're better off just staying with a few. So moving on to class and ID selectors, what we're going to be doing is starting with positioning: absolute, relative, fixed, and static are the four positions that you can employ when moving things around in layout in CSS. But I just want to make sure that you have a handle on these two selectors. So what you can do is you can set a style for an HTML element, such as you can set a style for a paragraph, for a header, and a very common selector is the div tag. And so the div tag kind of works like a container for objects that are within it. So you can create a div tag and then put things inside, like paragraphs and headers and lists and tables, and they can all exist inside this div tag. But you can also use class and ID selectors, and with them you can kind of create your own objects. So here's an example where the object that is created is called top, and so you can see there's a hash sign beside it, and I've defined top. I've given it a style, background color, and a padding for my top, and that is called an ID selector. It applies to only one single unique element on the page, and only one ID of the same name is allowed per page. So every HTML element has an ID and a class attribute, and the ID selector uses the ID attribute. So defined using a hash, and in terms of the naming convention, it cannot be named beginning with a number. A class selector, on the other hand, you could almost think of this as like a global variable, and it is indicated with a full stop or a period before the name, as opposed to the hash before the name. So what I've done is I've created a class called center. And this is not unique. It can be used on several elements. So I can have text that is centered. I can have a paragraph that is centered. I can have a box that is centered. I can have an image that is centered. And I can apply this class to any of these selectors that actually can be centered. So in the example shown, any element with a center attribute will be centered this way. Again, it can't be named beginning with a number, and any styling that needs to be applied to multiple elements should be defined with a class instead of an ID. So general rule here, if you just need to specify, if it's just you're just styling one single unique element, use an ID selector. If you want a whole bunch of different elements formatted the same way, then you're better off using class selector. Now in the example that I've got shown here, on the top I'm using an ID selector, and so you can see that the code, the HTML code that I've written, is I'm formatting this in using the div tag, and so the div tag has an ID attribute, and I'm using that, so number 1, and I've written some text. Div ID number 2 is some more text or another text. So in the style associated with that, number 1, I would like the color to be red, and number 2, I'd like the color to be blue, and you can see how it renders. So number 1 is red and number 2 is blue. Now let's say that I would like all of the text that is in a particular paragraph plus anything that, maybe I want all of my text to be blue. And I also want all my text to be bolded. I want the font weight to be bold. And so what I've done is I've created a class for that. So, and I've specified the font weight is going to be bold and the color is blue. Now the HTML code, you can see that I can apply class 1 to a paragraph, I can apply class 1 to a header 1, a header 2, I can apply it to a div tag and anything inside it, I can apply it to anything. So you can see how it renders on the right. The paragraph is bold and blue and the header is bold and blue. So I've got a couple of examples here for how you can use classes. So you can see I've got my CSS code at the top, replace this, and I've got my HTML document which calls the CSS code, and then I've finally got the result rendered. So let's look at the one on the top, and this is what we want to replace. I've seen quite a bit of CSS code, and a lot of it originated from the document that I handed out in the lab where we're altering the body and the header 1 image, etc. However, what I have seen is that a lot of it is repeated. And so maybe you've got, background color twice listed for header 1, header 2. Maybe you've got text, a font, weight or style, and you've got it repeated, header 1, header 2, header 3. So on the left you can see replace this CSS. I've got I've got the color blanked out there. Black is the color, and the background color of 090, which gives you this green. And then in the replace this, that's my CSS document. In the HTML document right beside it, I'm calling my CSS page, and I'm setting the body background color to red, so this will really stand out. And so you can see I've got header 1 and header 2. Now, what I could replace it with is what's underneath. And the CSS code in this case is called with this. And instead I've defined a class, and I have defined my class with the full stop dot all my headers, and I've got my color black again, or just the standard color, and my background color again the same 090 green. But you can see that what I can do is I've shrunk my CSS code a little bit because I've written one class that can be applied to several different elements. So you can see in the HTML code, H1 class is equal to all my headers, and H2 class is all my headers. And I can have a paragraph called all my headers, and I can have anything in a div tag called all my headers, and it would possess all of the characteristics that I've defined here with this class. It's like a global classification. So I've got a little bit of code here to show you how you can position things and how you can really create some layered effects. The very first, so remember that this is being read top to bottom, left to right, and the code is rendered top to bottom, left to right. So the very first CSS position, and in all of these cases I'm using an absolute position. So in other words, I don't want this to move ever. So I've got a header 1, I'm positioning it 85. Now it says top 85 pixels and left 50 pixels. Well, what I'm doing is I'm creating a margin on the left. So imagine what I'm doing if I'm saying left 50 pixels is I'm shifting it to the right, because I'm creating a 50 pixel margin on the left-hand side. Similarly for the top, I'm creating an 85 pixel margin on the top. And right down at the bottom, the HTML code, you can see I've got the header 1, here I am, and you can see in the output, there's my header 1. And so I am 50 pixels in from, now I've taken a screenshot, so you're not exactly seeing the full screen here, but it's in from the left and down from the top. Now my next element that I've got here is called, is this a regular HTML element? Is there something called box 1? No, there isn't. I've created it. This is my own ID, and indicated with the hash sign, so I've created something called box 1, and it's my very own object. So box 1, I would like it again positioned absolute, 50 down from the top, 50 in from the left. I'm also using a margin, and the margin, I could say top, bottom, left, right, but instead I'm saying I'm doing a little bit of shorthand, putting them all in a row. So that 15 is top, 0 for bottom, 18 or 15 left, and 35 right. And so I've got a width of 20%. You can use pixels as well. And I've got some cell padding here, 10 pixels of cell padding, and that just sort of makes it a little bit fatter. And a background color, I've got this sort of chartreuse color here. And here is box 1. So you can see that what it's done is I've actually overlapped my header. And this is because the header has an absolute position of 85 pixels from the top. And now the box has a position 50 pixels from the top, but it also has some depth to it. I've given it some padding, and that padding has pushed the whole box down. Box number 2, I've shifted that, way off to the right. I've got 150 pixel margin at the left-hand side, 150 at the top, and I've given it a different color. And so you can see here is box 2 over here. And what I've got here is what you may want to copy for a layout for your site. Now this is pretty traditional. We've got a header up at the top, maybe just a stripe, sometimes some menu items, and then fuller menu on the left, and the body. Now I've used those same funky colors for that upscale bakery. I don't suggest you use black as the area for your body text, because this is not something that the eye is used to. But the point is that, and you can see this floating box over top of it, so that you can position your elements instead of using tables. You can position your elements this way, and it's really quite easy. So here's the right up at the top, is just the text that I've decided to put in here. And I've just used, in all cases, I have used IDs instead of classes because this is unique. So my header, my stripe, the body text, and the menu are all unique elements that occur only once on the page. And so for that reason, I've chosen to use an ID instead of a class. However, my ID can be applied to, in this case, the first 4 are applied to paragraph text, and the 5th one, you can see that I've got it circled, it's applied to a div tag. And so anything inside the div tag is formatted, and with the div tag, I've aligned it as well. So what I've got here, if you look at the header, again, I'm positioning this absolute. This is just an example, and I'm using percentages for top, bottom, left, and right. I've got a 60% width across the page and a height of 15%. So that's 15% of the page. So what I've done in this case is I've said that I only want to take up 60% of my browser. And so this is one way of combating that rectangular shape that we have, the landscape rectangular shape that we are really not used to reading information on, because our books generally are formatted in portrait format, and all of the information that we usually read is portrait format. And so this is one way to counteract that by using this positioning, and we are incorporating the box model in CSS and only establishing it as a 60% width. So you can see that they all have a 60% width. They have different heights depending on what they are. So the body text here has a height of 70%. The menu also has a height of 70%, but only a width of 10. And so it only occupies part of the screen. And because I've absolute positioned it, it is sort of sitting over top of all of the other elements. And I've got a floating box here. I haven't actually included the code for this floating box, but I'm sure that you can figure that out by modifying the top, bottom, left, and right margins for that. You could probably accomplish the same thing. So I'd like you to watch a brief tutorial on YouTube. It's a great tutorial that gives you the difference between relative and absolute positioning, and does it much more eloquently than I could. And so because what I would like you to start doing is incorporating these positioning tools to locate elements on your page rather than confining them to tables. And so watch this. It's about a 7 or 8 minute tutorial, but a very good one. Now, what's on the midterm? So the midterm takes place in room 332, 333 at a 4 to 5 next week. And so it's not the greatest room for writing a written test, but that's the room that we've got. So I use Scantron cards, and I will be handing out the Scantron cards. You make sure that you bring a pencil. This is not an open book test, and you're not allowed a cheat sheet or anything like that. So primarily, this is going to be a multiple choice test. So the multiple choice, we have 40 multiple choice and 10 true false, which will also be filled out using the Scantron cards. So 50 questions for 20%. And this is going to include everything from a lecture and lab that we have done up to and including this particular lecture here. We're in week 6, and our week 6 lab, we didn't really have one because this was a work period for our interactive map. And so we won't be, we didn't really have a week 6 lab, but we did have a week 6 lecture, and we didn't cover too much in this lecture, but I would like you to watch that YouTube video. And obviously, because it's a multiple choice, I'm not going to be getting you to do any coding, but I may show you a snippet of code. You can count on me showing you a snippet of code and asking some questions about that. So what we will be covering is how to do frames is going to be one thing, and also quite a bit of CSS, cascading style sheets, HTML, and that is including I gave you some online HTML exercises, and I believe you did from 1 to 15 or 16. You had a bunch, 1 to 11 the first week, and then 12 to 16, I believe it was, the second week. And but this is mostly just theory. In addition, I would, the theory behind creating an image map. Now, I'm not going to ask you to be calculating the coordinate positions of a polygon or anything like that, but I would like you to know the general theory behind what is an image map, what are they used for, and really, and how do you define the image map object, and how do you call it. And so that is what's going to be on the midterm, and I think that your best bet would be to go over read the labs. And now I know that a lot of you haven't really read through all of the text that was on the lab, sort of maybe jump to the exercises, but it's a good idea to go over and actually read those labs. And in addition, just go over the PowerPoints and make sure you understand them. If there's anything that you're a little foggy on, by all means, drop me an email and I'd be happy to explain that to you. So we'll see you next week.